What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Fantasy Football Outpost. My name is Dallas. Unfortunately, Jay was unable to join us. If you've been keeping up with our quarterbacks and running backs rankings, I'm not quite sure in what order these will all release, but likely will be quarterback, then running back, then wide receiver, and then tight end, which is the order I'm recording them in. Me and Jay, our schedules have just not lined up for us to be able to get this episode out, and with the final draft weekend coming up, I went ahead and ran through these solo, but these rankings are our combined consensus rankings between what we both had. We basically added them together and then averaged it out, and then ran through the list, and then we broke them into tiers, which is something we did different this year to kind of fall more in line with what you're seeing more frequently, and basically helps in your drafts on if you miss out on somebody, if there's still more guys in that tier, it's not that big of a deal, as opposed to, oh, I had this guy ahead of this guy, so now I missed out big. You actually can still turn right around and take someone else that you're just as comfortable with in that same tier, and they're kind of interchangeable, and so that's why we did it tiers based, but they are still in order. So we're going to go ahead and kick things off with our tier 1 wide receivers. So our tier 1, we are a little bit mixed on our orders, but we are both in the exact same page on which 4 these were, and that is Davante Adams, Deandre Hopkins, Tyreek Hill, and Stephon Diggs. We're going to start off with Davante Adams. Jay has him at number 1 overall. I have him at number 2. There's not a whole lot to say here other than Rodgers is back. They're going to run it back again. He's an absolute touchdown machine, a target machine, from getting the targets from very valuable ones from Aaron Rodgers. You should see more of what you saw last year. I do think there's slight regression in the touchdowns because he had like 18 last year, which is just phenomenal, and he could still see 15, and I just think there's a slight step back, so I do have him 1 spot down at number 2 behind our next guy, but I definitely wanted to still show that Davante Adams is one of the safest bets you can make at wide receiver, barring any kind of injury, which applies to everyone. So that being said, Davante Adams shouldn't really shift your rankings much here. So moving on to our number 2 guy, he's actually my number 1 and Jay's number 2, is DeAndre Hopkins. DeAndre Hopkins, I think, is still going to have a significant workload here in Arizona, and I have Kyler Murray as my number 1 overall quarterback, which is what I was referencing on how it would translate over to this segment. Is I think Kyler Murray takes a significant step forward in his touchdown efficiency, and one of the main benefactors of that is going to be DeAndre Hopkins. So you basically get the season you got out of him last year where he finished as your wide receiver 5, and then bump him from 6 touchdowns up to 8, 9, 10, enough to bump him right up there ahead of Davante Adams, in my opinion, as the number 1 overall wide receiver. The best thing about DeAndre Hopkins is no one else feels this way, so he is an absolute steal. In most of your drafts, I have finally started to see his ADP rise to where he's going in that second round, which is still a steal, but I've been able to get him as my 3rd player in drafts where I stack up running back, and then I turn right around and can grab DeAndre Hopkins in the 3rd round, because in some leagues he's just faded, or these other guys people are more excited for, and so he's an absolute value in my opinion, especially in full PPR, which is what these rankings are. And so DeAndre Hopkins is my number 1, Jay's number 2. Should be a sure thing, as long as, of course, the offense runs smoothly like it did last year. I think they all take a step forward. I'm not a big believer in Rondale Moore, so I really don't think he impacts him at all. Christian Kirk, same boat. And then AJ Green, I think he's going to kind of honestly, you could split the targets that Fitzgerald got between AJ Green and Rondale Moore, primarily leaning AJ Green. I think Kirk comes down a little bit some on that, and so the balance is really a question between these other 3 guys, whereas DeAndre Hopkins is still going to get his. He's the most talented wide receiver in the NFL, in my opinion, on a skill-based set, and I think he's going to deliver for us big time this year, and so make sure you're grabbing DeAndre Hopkins. Moving on to our number 3 guy here, Tyreek Hill. Jay has him at 3. I have him at 4, but is literally interchangeable with him and our next guy, which is Stephon Diggs. Same thing there. He had him at 4. I had Diggs at 3. So let's get into Tyreek Hill first. Another absolute sure thing. With that's the consistency you're going to see with these top guys here. These are all absolute all-star wide receivers that have a significantly great quarterback in comparison to some of these next guys we're talking about. And so you're going to see heavy volume and great quarterback play supporting that, so they're the closest thing to sure things you can have. Tyreek Hill has shown time and time again he's going to absolutely explode. I liked his consistency kind of coming around a lot better last year, and so I think he continues more of that, and absolutely any one of these 4 guys can finish as your number 1, and they're all interchangeable, but Tyreek Hill, absolutely sure thing. And rounding things off with Stephon Diggs, as we went over in our quarterbacks episode, I'm a big believer in Josh Allen and the step forward he took. And I think that you can absolutely trust what we saw last year. And Diggs, again, they paid the moon and stars to acquire him. He's going to still be the main focal point of this offense with Josh Allen. And so I think it's full steam ahead for all four of these guys in our Tier 1 wide receivers. So moving on to our Tier 2 wide receivers. These are guys that I'm absolutely still very excited to have as my wide receiver 1 if the cards fall that way. And so let's go ahead and run through these. At 5, we have DK Metcalf. 6, Calvin Ridley. 7, Allen Robinson. 8, Justin Jefferson. 9, Terry McLaurin. 10, Keenan Allen. And 11, CeeDee Lamb. And so with these guys, like I said, they are all interchangeable. That's why we have them in the Tier 2 together. And so let's go ahead and start off with DK Metcalf. I have DK Metcalf at 5. Jay has him at 6. And again, if you go and watch our quarterbacks episode, I talk about how I think Russell Wilson actually got his way this offseason, and that's why all the disputes kind of ended out of nowhere, and they're going to be a pass-heavy offense again. And although the hires and the coaching staff did seem to point towards rushing, we're hearing a lot of talks at a camp with the wide receivers and stuff, talking about how they're getting involved in a lot of different ways, sounding like they're trying to become a more fast-paced and heavier passing offense. So I really think all that trends and lends itself to this whole offense taking a step forward and grabbing any of the pieces in it, and DK Metcalf is going to be that number 1 piece that you want. And so we have him at our 5. Our next in line is Calvin Ridley at number 6. Jay has him at 5. I actually have him down at 9. And so it's more of the same with what you're hearing everywhere with Calvin Ridley on his upside is he's always been good with or without Julio Jones. It kind of just really depends on what you believe about this offense. The reason I have him down at 9 is if you go back and look at Matt Ryan's efficiency with and without Julio Jones, it's significantly different. So his efficiency with Julio Jones, he was a back-end quarterback 1. His efficiency without Julio Jones, he was an early quarterback 3. Significantly different. On his points per game, it was like 30 to 33-ish points per game with Julio and like 18 without last year for Matt Ryan. And so when you take a look at that, it's really what do you believe? Now, the argument that I hear more often than not with Calvin Ridley is he's done it with and without Julio, and so he's proven he's going to be able to take that step forward. My only slight argument to that is just simply to pump the brakes on it is there's a big difference in being the defensive focus of a team who just found out on Friday that Julio Jones isn't playing, or they've been planning for the whole week for Calvin Ridley, but the whole season he was not the focal point, and now he's the main defensive focus for an entire NFL season. I just think they're gonna see enough volume there to where he's gonna easily be sustained as a wide receiver 1, and that's why I still have him at 9. But I can't seem to put him up there where I've seen him as high as like wide receiver 3 and 4 in some cases. And I just cannot jump on board with that because I do not think this offense is as efficient as it was with Julio. And so I do have him down at 9, but he still should be somebody you're excited to have as your wide receiver 1. Moving on to our number 7, this guy's kind of a personal favorite for both me and Jay, is Allen Robinson. This is probably the highest we've had him probably ever. A lot of that's to do with me. I have Allen Robinson as my wide receiver 6. Jay has him as his wide receiver 10. Now, I'm going to go ahead and explain a little bit why I have him ahead of some of these other guys. Is A, I think his target share is still locked and loaded. Even with Darnell Mooney rising, I'm actually really high on Darnell Mooney. But he is now, as soon as they hand the keys over, going to have the best quarterback that he's ever had in his career throwing him the ball. And that is the one knock on him, that he's always had just this pathetic quarterback play. But even worst case scenario, that they take a lot longer, Andy Dalton is still probably the best quarterback he's ever had throwing him the ball. And so when you look at that with his target share and his efficiency, I think on a talent-based perspective, he's one of the best wide receivers in the league. And I think he's going to capitalize big on that this year, especially once they hand the keys over to Justin Fields. He's going to be the focal point regardless of who it is. And I think the whole team as a whole, efficiency-wise, is going to come up. And that's going to significantly help Allen Robinson in that department. And so I have him as my wide receiver 6. But I absolutely can hear the argument for any of these next guys coming up here. That's why we have him at our 7. And so we're going to go and transition on to Justin Jefferson here as our wide receiver 8. Jay has him at 7. I have him at 11. And there's a couple things to this. I think a lot of it had to do with last year. Adam Thielen still had a great year. He was not the main focus of defenses. And so, as the year went on, he definitely became that. But Justin Jefferson, to me, is somebody who showed us he is an absolute baller last year. I'm not ready to hand him those keys. Is he somebody that can finish as the overall number 1 wide receiver? Absolutely. Every single one of these guys we're naming off here can. And so I don't see any reason to put him above any of these other guys right now personally. But again, I'm not going to knock it because I absolutely see the path. And I do think Adam Thielen takes a big step backwards, but I think that actually ends up hurting him more than helping him because he is going to be such a focal point of this offense that he's going to get the volume, and so that alone will help him. But I just don't see that massive leap that we saw last year. I think he does either. I could see him matching that or coming down some and finishing right here in the middle of these wide receiver ones. And so, by all means, if he's your guy and you want to take that shot, you do so. But there's just more guys in this area that I personally would rather have. And so the reason he's down at 8 here is primarily my fault because I have him at 11. All right, so next up is Terry McLaurin. It was our first pleasant surprise of the wide receivers. This has been a recurring theme in these where I explained to you that we actually did our rankings separate and then showed them to each other to form our consensus. And so there are guys that we find out like, oh, I was high on him. I wasn't expecting you to be, and he was too. And Terry McLaurin's one of those guys. I have Terry McLaurin as my wide receiver 7. Jay has him at his wide receiver 9. I mentioned this in our last week's episode about how being quarterback proof is very, very rare, and I think Terry McLaurin has already established himself as one of those guys. I think he's very, very elite wide receiver in this league, and I think now with Fitzpatrick and him being a focal point of this offense, you're going to have a massive step forward. You got Curtis Samuel being able to take some attention off of him now as well. De'Ami Brown has risen as another guy defenses have to respect. Antonio Gibson, J.D. McKissick are both going to be drawing targets. Logan Thomas, same thing. And so he's not going to be able to just be focused on every single game. And so he's going to be able to get open. He's a great route runner, a great separator. He's going to be able to get his. And I was a little worried at first on how that connection was going to be with him and Fitzpatrick. You know, did he really fit his style? And based on what we've seen in training camp and the preseason, it looks like it's going to work just fine. And so I'm ecstatic to get him, especially because he's a lot lower than the rest of these guys. In these drafts, you can usually get him as your 2, or if you go heavy running back, you can still secure him after going triple running back. You can secure Terry McLaurin as your wide receiver 1 in some cases still, and I'm perfectly content doing that. Next on the list at 10, we have Keenan Allen. Keenan Allen comes in at 11 for Jay, and I have him at 8 for me. I believe in Herbert's going to retain what he did last year, and because of that, Keenan Allen's such a focal point of this offense. I am not a Mike Williams believer. I don't think he's going to show up. I do like Palmer. I do like Tyron Johnson as auxiliary pieces that are going to help take some attention away, but Keenan Allen's going to get his. This is full PPR rankings, and so I really don't think there's any reason to knock him. He finishes as an absolute stud every single year, and so let's just give him the respect that he's due. And we have him at 10 overall. There's not much to say about him other than he's a very, very safe bet in PPR options, so make sure you take that shot when you can. Rounding out our last receiver in our tier 2, guys, this is one that primarily Jay, but I'm right there with him. I side with it. I just wasn't as brave as he was, if I'm being completely honest. Jay has him at 8, and I have him at 12. Rounding out my wide receiver 1s is CeeDee Lamb. We're both big believers in him coming out of college. I'm a Cowboys fan. He's a Sooners fan, so we both have a little bit of favoritism there, so I will give that discrepancy. But I said this last year when they drafted him, that come 2021, my thought was more so towards the end of the season, but based on what we're seeing in training camp, it's looking like it's going to be right away. He's going to become this team's wide receiver 1. I do still believe that because of the cost and the cap space, I do think this team moves on from Omari Cooper this offseason when they have an out on his contract going into 2022, and they just end up finding a nice slot piece that they can get and paying Gallup because he'll be at a discounted price versus what you would have to pay CeeDee Lamb and Omari Cooper when CeeDee Lamb's paycheck comes up instead of letting Gallup walk. So that's kind of been my whole theory this whole time, and a lot of that is centered around I fully believe CeeDee Lamb is the next elite Alpha X in this league. And I'm by no means saying he's with these guys yet. I'm talking about play style and the type of wide receiver he is. And again, you can be elite and not be one of these style guys. It's not a knock on any of these other guys. Is you have your Julio Jones was the one that's kind of starting on his way out now, and then you have your Deandre Hopkins and your Devontae Adams. These are your Alpha X wide receivers that can be pretty much anywhere on the field, going to absolutely dominate the ball because of what they can do with it. CeeDee Lamb, to me, is the next guy since Hopkins that has really filled that gap. We've got some guys that are starting to emerge that may potentially be that, but I definitely think he fits that mold of a DeAndre Hopkins light, and could it eventually end up there, which would be fantastic if so. But Justin Jefferson kind of looked like he was going to be able to be that last year, so we'll see how that plays off as well. But we're both very, very high on CeeDee Lamb and big, big fans and big believers of the talent. So CeeDee Lamb is somebody like the rest of the world. He's been rising, but I think I think with this offense and how high-powered it is, even with Omari Cooper existing and being great, I have Omari Cooper personally down at 14, but we'll get to him later in this episode. It's one of those things where you have to believe that he's going to be a very, very important part of this offense, and if he takes that leap forward that we think, he's going to deliver on his ADP. Again, if he keeps rising, I'm probably going to miss out on him, but right now he's in a sweet spot where I'm okay with taking him, and so CeeDee Lamb, we're both big believers, and that's going to round out our Tier 2 wide receivers. All right, so to kick off our Tier 3 wide receivers, we have our wide receiver 12, A.J. Brown, and wide receiver 13, Chris Godwin. It's just the two in this tier because they are like right there at the back of that last tier we mentioned, but not quite as comfortable putting them with the rest of those guys. These are guys that I'm still very much okay with having as my wide receiver 1, but I really would prefer them as my wide receiver 2. And that's A.J. Brown, Chris Godwin. A.J. Brown, I am more than comfortable with as my 1. I have him as my wide receiver 10 overall, and Jay has him as his wide receiver 14. It's mainly a question on Julio Jones, what kind of impact he has here, and I think Julio helps A.J. Brown, but I don't think he eats into his number 1 role. I think the development that A.J. Brown and chemistry he's developed with Ryan Tannehill, somebody else I'm very big on. I think because of the attention that Julio Jones is going to command, I think that does nothing but help A.J. Brown. And so you can see a world where they're both going to be really, really reliable. But I think ultimately this is going to be an offense that just really thrives, and A.J. Brown is going to be a piece that I want to have. His ADP has put him in a place where a lot of times there's other guys I have ahead of him that are available, so I usually pass on him. But definitely if he slips at all, then I'm going to be taking that shot. Again, I have him as my 10. He's our overall 12, leading off our Tier 3. And the last guy in our Tier 3 is Chris Godwin. We just have the two. I have Chris Godwin at 13. He has Chris Godwin at 12. It's more of a calling your shot in this Tampa Bay offense. Who do you think is going to be the guy? We both believe it's Chris Godwin. I think the injury last year kind of put a damper on his belief, so it kind of put him in a sweet spot this year in drafts. But this is a guy who was a wide receiver 2 overall 2 years ago, and so he has the ability. We've seen it, and then he looked great once they had everybody on the field. And so I think Chris Godwin's going to take a step forward now that he actually gets to develop that chemistry with Brady. We already saw it in some of the preseason games. And so overall, Chris Godwin should be a very safe guy, and the last guy I'm really, really comfortable with as my wide receiver 1. And then now we're going to move on to our Tier 4 wide receivers. There's only 3 of them here, and these are guys that I am ecstatic to have as my wide receiver 2. And so if you can, make sure you're grabbing these guys. Our number 14 is Robert Woods, 15 is Mike Evans, and 16 is DJ Moore. So we're going to start off with Robert Woods. I have him at 15. Jay has him at 17. I personally think he's the one to lean on in this Rams offense, and we're both big believers in Stafford. And so I get calling your shot between him and Kupp, but I think in PPR formats, Robert Woods is going to be your reliable guy that you're going to want to roll with. And so because of that surefire workload that he's going to see, I'm a big Robert Woods guy. So definitely excited to get him anywhere I can. Next up, we got Mike Evans. This is somebody I'm personally significantly lower on. I am a never draft for Mike Evans, but honestly, at this point, you can just label me a hater. It's fine. He's just not the guy I want on my fantasy team. His disappearing acts make him somebody I'm never willing to pay his price. If it's best ball, then sure, by all means, he becomes one of my favorite guys in best ball. But in redraft and dynasty and a situation like that, I just don't want to have him as a focal point on my team, which you have to have at his draft cost. And so I don't like relying on him if he ends up having those disappearing acts. Last year, we got lucky on some of those weeks where he happened to get a touchdown, but he literally had one game where it was a line of like 2 catches for 2 yards and 2 touchdowns. And so, of course, his stats were just phenomenal when you look at it from a points perspective, but I am not ever going to bank on something like that continuing to happen. He's probably going to finish as a top tier guy, a wide receiver 2, could even finish as a wide receiver 1. He always delivers at the end of the year, but my argument is always it's how he got there. And so if you're comfortable with that, by all means, I definitely highly recommend grabbing a safe bet as your wide receiver 2 behind him, or having a really safe bet ahead of him. And just make sure Mike Evans is not somebody that you have to rely on heavily, because his disappearing acts are going to hurt you bad. And so, but that being said, if he's your guy you believe in this offense, then by all means, I can't knock you for it. He's done it time and time again. He's just not somebody that me personally, I'm ever going to want to have on my team when it comes to how we get to the championship, because the last thing I need is I'm in the playoffs and he just decides this is the week he doesn't show up, and then you're left with this huge hole in production that you've been relying on week after week. And so, again, label me a hater. That's perfectly fine. I have him at my wide receiver 21. Jay has him at 13. And so if you want to call your shot on that, by all means, feel comfortable doing so. So our last guy in this tier 4 of wide receivers is DJ Moore. I have him at wide receiver 19. Jay has him at wide receiver 16. Again, I'm a little bit lower, but primarily because I'm higher on Robbie Anderson than he is. And so I think Robbie eats into his workload a little bit more. I do think he can see a little bit of an increase on touchdowns, but I don't think it's going to be the jump that we want to see. And so, again, he's right here in this middle. I like where we have him at. He's not too crazy, but he's safe. He's going to get you a heavy workload in PPR. He seems to be the deep ball guy now, so his catches are worth more too. And so he's going to be a focal point. He's their best wide receiver. Even with Terrace Marshall showing up, I don't think that impacts DJ Moore all that much. And so you should still feel very comfortable with DJ Moore as your wide receiver 2. And so that's why we have him here finishing out our tier 4 of our wide receivers at 16. All right, so moving on here to our tier 5 wide receivers, we kick things off with number 17, Omari Cooper, number 18, Cooper Kupp, number 19, Brandon Iuke, and number 20, Julio Jones. So Omari Cooper and Cooper Kupp, you could argue, could be a tier higher here with those last guys, but we ended up having them here. This is the order we put them in. I have Omari Cooper at 14. Jay has Omari Cooper at 24. He is a big believer in CeeDee Lamb, but he thinks that's at the expense of Omari Cooper. I personally believe in them both because I believe Dak's going to show more of the same of what we saw last year, and both of these guys are going to be extremely valuable, and so you definitely want to have them on your team. I'm more than okay with either of them on my team, but CeeDee's the one I want as a 1. Omari Cooper's the one I want to pair with one of the higher tier guys as a 1. But he's going to kick off our tier 5 here. He's should see a heavy workload like he always does. He is technically still the wide receiver 1 for that team. I just don't think that lasts very long. So we did knock him down a few tiers because of that. And so Omari Cooper should still be a safe bet, probably one of his safer bets. Again, he's always got that injury risk, but technically everybody does, so that shouldn't be enough to knock him too bad. But depending on where he's going in drafts, I usually pass on him because he's right there with CeeDee Lamb. I'd much rather just take CD, but if he keeps falling, then he's going to reach a point where I'm more than comfortable taking him. But usually there's just guys I like better than him that I can get after him, so I end up passing on him. And so number 18, we have Cooper Kupp. More of the same with Robert Woods that we said. He's going to be very reliable. He seems to be the touchdown guy here, and they've got an improved quarterback, so you could argue the improved ceiling for both of them is going to be higher. I prefer in PPR, though, to go Robert Woods. Cooper Kupp's still a very safe bet, so absolutely whichever one of those two you want to take. We have him down a tier below, though, down at 18, but they both are guys you should be excited to have on your rosters. I have Cooper Kupp as my overall wide receiver 18. Jay has him as his 15, so we're kind of in the same boat, a mid-tier wide receiver 2. But by all means, he's got a ceiling to be a 1. It just really depends on how they end up splitting things up in this offense. We both have him as a wide receiver 2, so absolutely should be more than comfortable drafting him where he's going in drafts. Real quick, guys, I don't know how this happened, but right after Cooper Kupp, we actually have Tyler Lockett. For all the same reasons I said, hype up DK Metcalf. Same thing with Tyler Lockett. He's going to be a PPR machine this year. Finishes great every year. I don't know how, for whatever reason, we skipped over his name. We actually skipped over Amari and Cooper Kupp and Tyler Lockett, but I noticed them. I didn't notice Lockett. They all three ended up at the same average, so I don't know why they just got skipped. But just wanting to mention, this is where we have Tyler Lockett is right behind Cooper Kupp, so keep that in mind when going into your drafts. He's one of the biggest steals this year, and I want to make sure that you guys do have that information going into your draft. So moving on to our wide receiver 19, Brandon Iuke, somebody I'm extremely excited about this year. I have him as my wide receiver 20. Jay has him as his wide receiver 21. He's somebody that I mentioned in our last episode that showed signs last year of being quarterback proof. Now, I get the knock on him. Debo was hurt, Kittle was hurt, and that's why he got all his attention. That being said, when the shot was called, he delivered, and this is somebody that they really wanted. The fact that this team fully believes in him, I do think he becomes the focal point of this offense when it comes to receiving work, right behind Kittle, and I have him significantly higher than Debo. I won't say significantly higher, but I have their ADPs making sense, is what I should say. I'm more than happy with Debo later on, but I definitely would prefer Iuke by a large margin. And so Iuke is somebody who I fully believe on. Second-year wide receiver leap, he's going to take right there with CeeDee Lamb. I have him as my third wide receiver from last year's class. overall coming into this year behind Justin Jefferson and CeeDee Lamb. I think Brandon Iuke takes that leap that we all want to see, and honestly could finish even higher than this, but this is just where we want to put him, keep him at a safe bet. I think his ceiling is a high one, though, so when he shows up in your drafts, as long as his hamstring issue ends up being fine, I think he's a great pick. And rounding out our tier 5 of wide receivers, like I mentioned earlier, is Julio Jones at number 20. Kind of depends on what you believe in him. Jay has him at 20. I have him at 22. I just think he takes a little bit of a step back, but he's still Julio Jones, so he's going to get his. He's just not really going to see a lot of touchdowns, but it really depends on his target share. I don't think he's ever been in an offense like this where the running game was the primary focus, and then he had another receiver. This is the last time he's had another receiver of this talent next to him since Roddy White. If you don't count, Calvin Ridley prior to this leap he's about to take this year and what he did last year. So you could argue that, but I just don't think this passing volume is going to match what you saw in Atlanta. So I do have Cleo Jones down at 22. I think he's a safe bet, but there's usually guys where he's going in drafts that I'd much rather have. And there's some guys that are going behind him that I'd rather take the shot on, because I feel like although they may finish slightly lower, I think their ceiling is higher based on just where Julio Jones is at in his career. Could be completely wrong. He could come in and completely dominate this offense, and we all feel stupid for putting him here. But absolutely, if he's somebody you're comfortable with, this is where we have him backing our tier 5 wide receivers at wide receiver 20. So moving on to our tier 6 wide receivers. At 21, we have Ja'Marr Chase. 22, we have Deonte Johnson. 23, Jerry Judy. 24, T. Higgins. And 25, Chase Claypool. So we're starting off with Ja'Marr Chase. Jay actually has Ja'Marr Chase at wide receiver 19. I have him all the way down at wide receiver 27. I'm not quite a believer in Chase as he is. I do believe in the talent. I believe in the prospect. Watching his film, there really wasn't much of anything he couldn't do. But I think with him taking a year off last year, I think he's going to have a bigger learning curve than we think. So he's somebody that I personally would like to pass on in drafts, and then if he struggles early on, try to go trade for him, because I think he could end up turning things around as the season goes along and end up really delivering on his upside. But I just think his ADP cost is just way too high for me to ever even remotely look his way. I can say with almost 100% confidence there's not going to be a draft where I come out with Ja'Marr Chase unless he just gets faded by everyone in it and it reaches a point where I'm comfortable taking him. But he's an absolutely amazing talent. I just think he's way too expensive and isn't going to deliver on that cost. That being said, we do have him at the beginning of our tier 6 here at 21. Moving on to somebody who I like a lot more than Ja'Marr Chase, and this is somebody that Jay is a lot lower on, is Deonte Johnson. I have Deonte Johnson at wide receiver 17. Jay has him at 30. And so my belief in Deonte Johnson is just as somebody who averaged almost 10 targets a game last year and absolutely thrived. And Ben Roethlisberger is taking a step forward. He's not coming off of that injury now. He's had a full offseason now, again, back from it. He looks great. The whole offense looks great this offseason. And so I think they all take a step forward. And Deonte Johnson in PPRs is the one that I want to have on my team. And so I definitely can see kind of the him being the Tyler Lockett to Chase being the DK, just at a lower tier. And I'm going to take Deonte because of his sure target share that he's going to pull. And so that's why we have him here at our wide receiver 22. So next up at our wide receiver 23, again, this is a lot to do with me being a lot higher on him. I'm calling my shot on him as Jerry Judy. I actually do have him as my wide receiver 23. Jay has him down at 31. I just believe he's the significantly better wide receiver than Courtland Sutton. I'm nowhere near as high on Courtland Sutton as most people are. Whereas Jerry Judy, I believe, was drafted, in a lot of people's opinions, he was the best receiver in the class. I did have CeeDee Lamb ahead of him, but his route running is just phenomenal, and he had horrible quarterback play from Drew Lock last year. And so I think with Teddy Bridgewater being there, more reliable for that style of receiver, I think it's going to help Jerry Judy significantly. Now, I did make the same argument last year for DJ Moore with Teddy Bridgewater. So if Teddy Bridgewater gets in and tries to air it out, I think that was more so their system there in Carolina wanting to do that, and so that's why they moved on from him. But I think Jerry Judy's going to thrive with Teddy Bridgewater, and I think Drew Lock has now seen what Jerry Judy is capable of and how it's a smart idea to get the ball in his hands. And so I'm calling my shot on Jerry Judy. I think he's going to finish as a wide receiver 2 this year and with a higher ceiling than that, and he is an absolute steal in draft. So I say grab him anywhere you can. I end up with him as like my wide receiver 4 in a lot of leagues, which is phenomenal for me because I have him as a wide receiver 2. And so rounding things out at wide receiver 24, or not rounding things out, we have one more after him in this tier, but wide receiver 24, we have T. Higgins. I have T. Higgins at 24. Jay has T. Higgins at wide receiver 35. Again, you're kind of seeing a trend here where I'm a little bit higher than he is on these guys. But again, we took a balance on all of our guys and averaged them out and put them together here, and that's kind of how we ended up where we're at. But T. Higgins, to me, is going to be the one to look for in the Cincinnati offense. I think he made a good connection with Burrow last year. I think he's going to be the one that's ready to take that leap, whereas Chase has a little bit more of a learning curve. And even once Chase comes around, I still think Higgins is going to be a huge focal point. I'm a lot lower on Tyler Boyd than most people are, and so even though a lot of people are low, I'm significantly lower. I do not think he's going to see close to the workload he did last year. So for me, it's T. Higgins. I think he's going to be a very, very reliable bet. And he's a good value in drafts because he's going right around where Jerry Judy is as well. I have both of them finishing out our 23-24 wide receiver 2s. That's going to lead us to our last guy in this tier, which is Chase Claypool at wide receiver 25. I have him at wide receiver 25, and Jay has him at wide receiver 34. And so I did kind of give Jay a little bit of grief on this. I wish he was here to be able to explain his side a little bit better about how we're both high on Ben Roethlisberger, but he's so low on Deonte Johnson, Claypool, and Juju. And I kind of was like, you got to call your shot on one of them. I think that both Deonte Johnson and Claypool are going to be very good this year and deliver. I have Deonte at my 17 and Claypool at my 25. And so these are guys you're absolutely going to be happy with on your teams. I do think Claypool's cost leads me to usually pass on him because I do have some of these guys ahead of him. That being said, if you believe he's going to take that DK leap, then absolutely fine, call your shot and do it. But I just don't think he's quite the talent that DK is, but I think he can take a significant leap and deliver on a back-end wide receiver too. If the cards fall right, one of these guys, he's going to move up. And so I'm definitely all in on the Steelers' offense this year. Really, only one I'm not interested in is Juju or Ebron, of course, but everywhere else I think you're going to be very, very safe bets. And so typically we would stop there. I'm going to throw in a couple more honorable mentions because these are guys that we're both high on, or guys that probably should have been mentioned, but one in particular is Adam Thielen. I'm just so much lower on him. Jay has him at 23. He finished last year as a wide receiver 1. I have him falling all the way down to 38. This is me just kind of calling my shot that this is his cliff year. I think he takes a significant step down. Last year he finished high, but his efficiency was terrible, and so I think the writing on the wall is there for Adam Thielen to fall. That being said, Irv Smith now being down and going to miss some weeks, I think he's definitely going to finish higher than what I have him. I just have not been able to update my rankings since the Irv Smith injury, but I'm not a believer in Adam Thielen, and his ADP has me not drafting him anywhere. Jalen Waddle we have at 26. I actually have him at 32, and Jay has him at 29, and so he evens out as our 26 because of, again, these. Once it gets to this point, we're very different on some. I may have one high, you may have him extremely low, and that puts him lower than somebody we have a few spots behind. And so we're both big believers in Waddle. He's my second favorite receiver coming out of this class behind Jamar Chase. I think he quickly becomes the one in Miami personally, and I'm a big believer in Tua taking a step forward. So Jalen Waddle is somebody I'm trying to grab everywhere I can in drafts. And we've also got Brandon Cooks. Just out of respect, he should be on your boards because, again, he's just kind of getting buried, but he's going to see such a significant workload there that he's going to be a very safe bet for where he goes in drafts, just to throw on as a flex or a bye week starter or some depth in case of injury. He's somebody you definitely should be looking at because his target share is pretty much locked. There's no one taking that from him. And the last two we're going to mention here are Laviska Shenault and Michael Pittman. Both of these guys, year 2 guys, planning to take a big step. I'm a big believer in Laviska Shenault being the one in this offense. I have him at 31, so again, I think he's got high potential to finish higher than that, but there's just guys around here that I like better. And then Michael Pittman, I have at 29. With the news about T.Y. Hilton possibly missing all or most of the season, I think I was already big on Pittman taking a step forward, and I think he's going to do that this year. I have Pittman at 29, but these are both guys I could easily see finishing as wide receiver 2s. I think they're going to be that fringe back-end wide receiver 2, early wide receiver 3, guys that where they're going in drafts, you're very happy taking them. And so these are our wide receiver rankings. Again, wide receivers keep going on. There's a lot more guys that you should be excited about past this point. With that being said, we're going to stop there. Thank you guys so much for watching. Leave any comments below if you have any questions about anything. We're here to answer them. And follow me on Twitter at DallasFFO. Follow Jay at PickOnTheBlock. You can follow us at the FF Outpost on Twitter as well to see any kind of updates and stuff like that. And thank you guys so much for watching. Subscribe if you haven't. Make sure you hit that notification bell, and we will see you in the next one. Bye.